Gambit is inherently a complicated game mode, requiring divided attention while punishing mistakes severely. Let's work on improving your mindset in Gambit so you can better set yourself and your team up for success. In Gambit, there's a handful of roles that any given player can choose to take over for their team. However, the one thing that everyone needs to know how to do and do well is ad clear, which, by definition, means killing standard, non-boss enemies that spawn into each zone. When they spawn in, they are added to the encounter, so they're called ads for short, and we will refer to them as that throughout this video. Let's start off with some fundamental tips that are pertinent throughout the entire game in relation to ad clearing before we dive into the idea of hitting blocker timings, invade timings, counter invade timings, just all that high-level stuff. We'll do that later. For now, the basics. As a singular point of inspiration, throughout this video guide, you'll be seeing me playing mostly as a Titan, using the Code of the Missile Arc subclass. In my opinion, this is the best subclass in the game for clearing ads in Gambit, when combined, of course, with the insurmountable Skullfort exotic. This allows you to use your dive punch as often as you want, as long as it kills at least one opponent each time. It also prompts regeneration of your health every time you get a kill, which is fantastic in this mode. For the vast majority of you simply playing this mode casually in matchmaking, I would strongly recommend having at least one Titan using this subclass on your team at any given time, especially on PC if you know how to Titan skate. Otherwise, a good masterworked pulse rifle is going to do you very well as long as you're not too aggressive with your positioning. That's going to get all kinds of kills very quickly while generating lots of orbs for your team from a safe distance. Think Blast Furnace, go figure, Bygones, or Chattering Bone as possibilities here. And you're of course looking for Outlaw Rampage or Outlaw Kill Clip on any of these pulse rifles. If you really wanted to go with a hand cannon or the breakneck auto rifle, you could do those as well. Something like a Midnight Coup would be fantastic, but it's gonna be, by definition, a little worse than a pulse in the likely event that you have to defend against an invader without heavy ammo, or perform an invade without a heavy ammo or super, and you only have your kinetic to do it with. A Midnight Coup is not going to help you out when you spawn on the opposite side of the map from an enemy team. A pulse rifle, on the other hand, will do the job. So that is why, just as an overall, always useful weapon, pulses are my general recommendation in Gambit. No matter which way you go, though, the important thing here is that your weapon is masterworked. Making orbs on every multi-kill can absolutely make or break games in Gambit, so focus hard on doing that when you can. This is the major reason why I do not recommend Malfeasance in Gambit, because, while yes, it does a little extra damage to invaders, sure, one entire mag will almost kill an ogre in and of itself, but you just don't help very much in the majority of the game. You do not clear ads effectively with that weapon, and you don't even make orbs. You also cannot invade very well with that weapon, so it's just hard to recommend most exotics that don't have a catalyst. And most exotics, even with catalysts, are not as good as something like a Chattering Bone, Bygones, Go Figure, or Blast Furnace. They just don't seem to compete. It's hard to recommend anything else. As for positioning when clearing ads with your kinetic weapon in Gambit, make sure not to be too aggressive. Enemies hit quite a bit harder than you might be used to from your standard PvE fights, where you're generally very overpowered for most encounters. Oftentimes you're going to find that you're just completely surrounded by ads that don't ever seem to miss, and they really hate you. Don't get too aggressive when you're only clearing with your kinetic. You will die, you will lose your motes, and you will be very sad. Just remember to be methodical and take a little bit of time with your kills, but don't be lackadaisical. Don't waste time. Don't let those motes expire. Just be safe in how you clear things, and things will go just fine for you. Next up, let's use this opportunity to talk about weapon choices in general. I've already revealed my general thoughts that I think pulse rifles are king of the kinetic slot, especially Blast Furnace and Go Figure. Within optimal range and with all headshots, 2 burst Guardian kills with either of these guns are very doable, even without damage boosts from Rampage or Kill Clip. At the same time, most orange bar enemies still melt the pulse headshots, and the few exceptions that don't are in the class of enemies that are reserved for your energy slot anyways. Straight up, you should be running the Ikelos shotgun as your energy weapon, full stop. Unless you are, like, super worried about invaders or are going to be doing invades and you want a sniper rifle specifically, there is no energy weapon that comes remotely close to EP Shotgun for ad clearing, guardian killing, and boss damage all in one ammo efficient package. However, I will say that during Primeval damage phases, energy snipers aren't the worst thing in the world as long as you have plenty of ammo, triple tap, or a rally barricade style effect, and you hit all of your headshots. Your damage is not necessarily competitive with an EP shotgun, but it's definitely up there. It's definitely good. So choose one of these two styles of weapons, but 99% of the time, you should be going for that EP shotgun. For your heavy slot, this has been tumultuous all throughout Gambit's short lifespan thus far. Sleeper Simulant is still OP levels of good, but not quite the monstrosity or quite as common as it used to be. Queenbreaker is in the exact same boat, still OP, but you see it a lot less in general. Definitely more than the Sleeper Simulant, but still not quite as often as you see something like a machine gun. The Hammerhead and the Thunderlord are pretty much the go-to heavy weapons in Gambit right now, and I don't see a world coming anywhere in the next few months where that is going to change. Machine guns right now have a pretty high degree of aim assist, they fire really fat bullets, they have fantastic boss and guardian damage potential, and they're all in all top-tier weapons. They do everything, and they do it efficiently. You can't cross-map kill guardians with these guns, sure, but anything shorter range than mapping somebody is a brainless, no effort, near instant kill with these things. Machine guns are the best of both worlds in terms of guardian killing and boss killing, so make sure you're setting up for machine gun burn damage whenever you can once those Primeval envoys are dead. If you're running a machine gun, make sure you've got either a rally barricade or Lunafaction boots infused rift handy to keep your magazine filled. And make sure to get a boss spec mod installed if you're not using an exotic. If you've got Rampage on your Hammerhead, and there are some small adds near the Primeval, it's worth putting a couple quick headshots into each one before dumping your mag into the boss, since it'll add a very significant amount of damage to your overall burn phase. There's also the benefit of this weapon dealing void damage, which means it gets a full benefit from a teammate running a tractor cannon, which, by the way, is also, in my opinion, a great heavy to run in Gambit. You shouldn't be invading with it unless you're an insane Titan skater, but it'll give allied void weapons a 50% damage bonus on the boss, and if you've got a lot of ammo, you can stun lock the boss for a long period of time by just booping them over and over and over. Anyways, back on the machine gun topic. Your other machine gun that I'd recommend is the Thunderlord. This is worth your exotic slot in Gambit for the sole reason that once you've been firing it for a given amount of time, the firing rate ramps up. Combined with a Rally Barricade, Lunafaction Rift, or a Lunafaction Well, you have such a consistent and reliably good flow of damage that is just really hard to beat. The only thing that would even come close would be like an EP shotgun burn at point blank, and that is way less safe and way less consistent and reliable than a machine gun burn. The added benefit of these heavy ammo burns is that your ammo doesn't carry over to the next round anyways, so as a rule, you might as well just burn all of your heavy on that boss. The same of course applies to special ammo, but either way, use up that ammo, whatever way you can. And now with that knowledge in mind, depending on how the game is going, sometimes you can be greedy and save your melee ability, save your grenade, save your class ability, or even your super during your Primeval burn phase. These cooldowns will carry with you to the next round, so sometimes this Gambit, wink, can be worth it. Finally, as one added note, if you're going to be the team's dedicated invader, I'm quite partial to using cluster rockets and the colony grenade launcher in particular against enemy guardians. They let you force people out of cover, so you can plink them down with your pulse rifle, and they allow you to saturate banks with explosives, so it's impossible for an enemy team to turn in. While they're quite lackluster for boss damage, they can at least let you nuke down Primeval envoys when they spawn, and they're just plain fun. Which is actually a thing you're allowed to have in video games. Crazy, right? When it comes to supers, you should never be afraid of using them to clear waves of adds particularly quickly. Most maps have at least one spot that enemies congregate in at the very first spawn, letting you get a solid 10 or more kills with one blast with proper timing and positioning. the trees in the EDZ, and the drill on the Nessus map come to mind as great starting points here. Try to communicate with your team to see who has super energy, who still needs it, and also compare the score differentials between both teams. If you're already ahead, and you've got supers up, it makes sense to still use one super in order to get more ahead and rush your Primeval out. If nobody's got supers besides you, congrats. You're giving them orbs, and you can start a super chain on subsequent waves of adds. Frankly, just don't be too stingy with your supers. Use them to your advantage, especially if you've got a hunter using the Knives super and running the Shards of Galanor. Also, don't be afraid to cycle your supers on blockers. If you've got 2 knights on your bank, think of each of them as being worth 2 orbs each. 2 knights is 4 orbs for your team. That's a lot of super for everyone else to get. And if there's more blockers than that, oh boy, are you making a lot of orbs. And where better to make those orbs than right on your bank? It's seriously one of the best ways to use your super. I almost never see anyone use them that way. Just, quite frankly, it's a huge time saver for your team, and it's just going to be a big benefit. Let some of the blockers just stack up for a little while, then clear all of them in one fell swoop of a super, make 6, 7 orbs, and there you go. You're golden for the rest of the game. So it's really a viable tactic that I don't see anyone doing, and I really think people ought to try. Next up, let's run through some recommended subclasses, then we'll get more into the nitty-gritty of how to alter your mindset and how to make timing plays to drastically change the outcome of your games. For Titans, all 3 element types are good. For Arc Titans, I recommend Middle Tree alongside of the Skullford exotic to become the best ad clearer in the game. For Solar Titans, you already know the answer. Top Tree for Melting Point is the way to go, but Middle Tree isn't the worst thing in the world for boss damage either. It's a really slow super, meaning it takes you a long time to deal all the damage it can possibly do, and it's a little bit vulnerable to invades, but as long as you're casting it from within a group of smaller adds and getting all 3 stacks of your whatever that buff is called for max damage, it's okay. Void Titans get the short end of the stick here, but Middle Tree Titans can help a lot with survivability during ad clearing phases, creating lots of orbs for the team, as well as protecting them from invaders during boss burn. It's not something I would recommend, but if you're gonna play this subclass, it's solid enough. Warlocks. You've got 3 subclasses I would recommend, and wouldn't bother with anything else. Well of Radiance is the obvious choice for boss damage, and now has the added benefit of hard countering machine guns. In a lot of cases, the healing from your well seems to outpace machine gun damage from range, making your team effectively invulnerable to them if that's all the enemy team is bringing to their invasions. Plus it buffs your damage, so it makes the invader very, very unlikely to want to engage you head on anyways. This wasn't the case just a month ago, when everyone was still running Sleeper and Queenbreaker, which are still going to insta-kill you in that well, even if you've got a full overshield. So there's a small metagame here that both sides have to play around with. Is it going to be a machine gun invade? Is it going to be a linear fusion invade? Is it going to be a sniper invade? You have to think about all of these factors before you drop that well down. If you're trying to drop it reactively to what the enemy is bringing in, you're too late. You're gonna die. Anyways, Dawnblade is also a good enough super, but only for dedicated invaders. The movement speed of the super is unparalleled, and your fat, explosive projectiles, which also track, can pretty much guarantee at least 2 kills on most invasions, if not more. I don't necessarily recommend you ever run this on a 4-stack team, but if you're going to run an offensive invasion super on your Warlock, this is the one to reach for, I guess. Finally, your Middle Tree Arc super, combined with Geomag Stabilizers, is your premier boss damage super in Gambit. Just run it, please. Hunters, you should be running Blade Barrage with Shards of Galanor. Full stop. If you don't have Shards of Galanor, you should probably still be running Blade Barrage. If you really don't want to do that, you could run Tethers with Orpheus Rigs, but it's basically Blade Barrage without the damage. Or you could be really gamey and run Bottom Tree Gunslinger without Celestial Nighthawk and use it to invade and counter invade, then open your menu and put the Nighthawk on when it's time to do boss damage. Like, if you really want to be that gamey with it, you could, but it's very hard for me to recommend any Hunter super that is not the Blade super with Shards of Galanor. It's just so incredibly good. It clears entire waves of adds, it does incredible boss damage, it recharges your own super at least a quarter of the way, sometimes 3/4 of the way, and it makes 1 billion orbs for your team. Like, it's the best super for hunters, for Gambit, and just in general right now in Destiny for 99% of situations. If you're not running this super as a hunter, you're kinda wrong, in my opinion. Anyways, to summarize so far, we've learned the optimal Gambit loadouts, which in my opinion tends to be a Pulse Rifle, EP Shotgun, and Thunderlord. We've learned the optimal subclasses, which are Middle Tree Arc Titan, Top Tree Solar Titan, Middle Tree Arc and Solar Warlock, and Middle Tree Solar Hunter. We've learned the importance of masterworked weapons to generate orbs for our teams, cycling supers on waves of adds or on blockers to speed up our game, and that machine guns are the name of the game right now for both boss damage and guardian killing. With all that knowledge imparted, it's time for us to talk about some more nitty-gritty stuff. Blocker timings, invasion timings, counter-invasion timings, and more. Let's imagine we're starting a brand new match of Gambit. The first thing we need to recognize is that our first wave of enemies can drop anywhere between 20 and 27 motes depending on how many spawn there. For example, by the drill on the Nessus map, you're going to get a lot of enemies spawning. Oftentimes I have seen that initial mote counter going over 25, and if you have a full team turning off that, you could theoretically invade, but I've never once actually seen that happen. In practice, you're more likely going to be invading halfway through that second wave of adds. Watch your enemy's progress bar on the top of your screen to see when they're generating motes, when they're grabbing motes, and when they're likely in transition between zones or heading towards the bank to inform your decisions of when to invade and when to put your own blockers in the bank. This will also inform you of when they're about to deposit and instantly invade you instead. If the enemy team is only a few motes away, and you don't see any motes being added onto their total, you know they're all running to that bank right now. Start pre-aiming at one of the invaders' spawn points because you're about to get your world rocked. When it comes to blockers, I always see people saying that getting that first small blocker in really counts, but honestly, I can't say that I agree with that sentiment. One small blocker is 2 to 3 shots with your EP shotgun. They take no time at all to clear. Medium blockers are 3 shots and 2 melees as long as you're going for your headshots. The real danger of blockers comes when they're placed down in groups at a time, multiplied by simultaneous invasions. In the early game, my advice would be to avoid dropping only a single blocker on the enemy team. Don't be that guy who gets 5 and immediately turns around, rushes to the bank, and tries to shove that blocker in. I was that guy for a while, and it doesn't do anything. It's a waste of your time, it's a waste of your team's time, it's a waste of a blocker. Just don't be that guy. Try to work with your team to drop at least 2 simultaneously or even in quick succession. That means that you'll drop a blocker down while your teammate is really close to the bank but not quite there, and they're running in. Then they drop theirs, then maybe even a third teammate can run in and drop their next one, etc. Dropping one at a time in rapid succession can waste just as much time as 3 sequentially. Don't think of these blockers as an impedance for the enemy team. Think of them as purchasing more time for your team, and the more blockers you drop simultaneously, your money multiplies, basically. If you're dropping that first small blocker when you know both teams are in transition from point to point, that means multiple enemies are going to team up on your one small blocker, and it's going to die instantly, and you've barely bought any time for your team. Dropping 20 motes on the enemy team at the same time, though, especially if you know they've already transitioned beyond their bank, is a big time purchase for your team. If only one guy goes back to clear, it's going to take him a long time. If 3 guys go back to clear, it's still going to be kind of annoying for them. With that said, generally as an invader, you should position like this. At the start, run in with the team, getting kills and motes on the first wave only. Then transition to the bank and focus purely on getting kills from afar while your team keeps working towards 25. Kill all blockers that come out by yourself, then bank your motes and wait for heavy. When invading in this way, you guarantee you got at least one ally in the form of a blocker that's coming with you on your invade, and you know that they're buying you time to get your eyes on that bank to try stopping any inevitable turn-ins. If your team dropped a bunch of blockers with you, awesome. But if not, you've got at least some sort of baseline to work with when figuring out how best to attack the enemy team. Small optimizations like this can make all the difference in Gambit, so be sure to take advantage. Once you get past those first couple waves of ads though, Gambit gets a lot more tumultuous. It's very momentum based, so focus on that scoreboard and use it to inform your positioning at all times. Always remember that when it's time for an invader to spawn, there's only one spawn location in each zone that they could potentially spawn in. Once you learn those, you can pre-aim in those locations, waiting for the invader to come through. This is especially easy if your team invades first, because the dead invader can watch the enemy's portal while waiting to respawn, and they can call out the exact timing someone is going through. It's super lame and super gamey, but it's not something that'll ever be changed more likely than not, so abuse it. Also remember that there's logic to enemy invader spawn-in locations. I don't think that these are hard and fast rules, but generally spawning seems to follow this schema before primevals are spawned. Invaders do not spawn in the same zone enemies are spawning, usually. So right away, if your enemies are spawning mid, you know the invader has to be either left or right. On the second invade, the same rule applies. The invader won't spawn where enemies are spawning, usually, and they also tend to not spawn in the same spot they did the first time, usually. Thus, you can often predict exactly where their second spawn is going to be because you eliminated 2 potential points, they only have 1 left, and you can abuse that. It's really hard to perform the second invade versus the first against a team who is very aware of you as an invader and they're watching for you, they're predicting you. It's really hard. Finally, I guess we can talk about Primeval timings? Really, there's just not much to say here. Getting your Primeval out ASAP is pretty much always a good thing because you want to start the clock on your Primeval Slayer stacks as rapidly as possible. You don't necessarily need to kill the envoys instantly, but getting that clock going is the most important thing. When your invader starts going in on an enemy team with the Primeval spawned, generally you want them to continuously invade through the portal on cooldown in most situations. Major exceptions might be for high-level teams with linear fusion rifles trying to slap you off spawn the moment that you come through, but that's not the norm against most players that you'll find yourselves against. And also, very few people seem to be running linear fusions anymore. There's just so many machine guns found in Gambit right now that it's less of a concern. Instant invades seem to be kind of the meta at the moment, but that's changing kind of week to week, month to month, so don't think of it as being the norm always. Always evaluate your current meta, no matter when you're watching this video. My major advice on Primeval invades is even though you should be doing them as often as possible, you don't always want to go really hard on them. You don't always want to go in, get a kill, get 2 kills, and then die. The thing you're trying to do when invading versus a Primeval is you want to create a player advantage. If you kill 2 but survive the invade, that means your team is at a big man advantage for going all in on burning down your boss, or if you're really far behind, then getting moats and getting turn-ins to start getting your Primeval up and ready. That's what you really want to see in an ideal world, is just getting a small man advantage, staying alive, and coming back to assist on your own boss burn. But sometimes you do have to go as hard as you can on those, especially if the enemy team has had their Primeval up for a long time, they have a lot of Primeval stacks. Sometimes you need to just go in and wipe the entire team in order to get as much time back for your team as possible. It's just something you'll have to do sometimes, but it's really hard for me to give you hard guidance on when to and when not to go all in, quote unquote. You can only learn that by yourself with experience. And with that, we finally have the closing of our Gambit guide. These mindsets and strategies have helped me a great deal in improving my Gambit play and will surely help you to perform better in your public matches as well. If you remember nothing else from this guide, I want you to engrave these ideas on the neurons of your brain. First, choose your role and stick to it, or be willing to inspect teammates and swap to what is truly needed. Second, if you're not invading, leave the first heavy for your invader. If nobody on your team has an invader loadout, take initiative and be the invader. Even if you're not super great at it, a bad invader at the right time is oftentimes way stronger than a good invader at a pointless time. Third, remember that you drop 3 motes when dying as an invader. If you're being countered really hard, sometimes the best you can do is simply not give the other team those 3 motes from you dying. If there's 3 guys all staring at you, just waiting for you to poke out from the corner to all team shot you, you're wasting their time. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to do as an invader. There is no reason for you to move. Just stand there and let them waste their time. Even if you get no kills, you have done something positive for your team. You have gained at least 10, 15, 20 seconds for your team, if not more. And if they manage to start moving again because they're getting impatient and you can pop them while they're in transition because they think you're not going to do anything, then hey, more power to you. You got an extra bonus there. But your main goal is just to kill time, one way or another. Not dying and not giving them 3 motes while simultaneously not getting any kills is not the worst thing in the world. Fourth, share turn-in points with your team. If you're at the front of the pack and you've got 2 people behind you all running to the bank to turn in, don't take the closest turn in, go around the bank to the farthest one so everyone can cleanly turn in without making an awkward lineup. Let everyone operate quickly and efficiently. It's just better. Fifth, hit turn-ins with momentum when you can. Jumps, slides, whatever. You'll keep some of that momentum while the turn-in animation plays, which saves you precious milliseconds while also making you a much harder target for invaders to shoot. Sixth, be willing to adapt your role. If you're down on resources and it's boss melt time, you're better off positioning in an anti-invade position or focusing down adds. This helps to keep your team alive, and in the latter case produces you the ammo that you need to melt the boss. Seventh, if you're the dedicated invader during an enemy's burn phase, don't forget about it after you die. Don't stop invading. If you make a mistake and start ad clearing or start boss damage randomly and nobody else takes over the invasion slot for you, that's a free burn phase for the enemy team, which is usually a near instant loss. Keep the pressure on, even if you don't have the resources that you need for a perfect invade. Ideally, a teammate would take over for you, but that's not always possible. Keep up pressure any way that you can. And eighth, don't focus on blaming your teammates for mistakes, dropped motes, or whatever. You can always improve your own play and do things better. Place your energy there while building your team up instead of tearing them down, and you'll be sure to find more success than ever before. And with that, everyone, we are done, finally. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you've learned something new. If you've got any questions or strategies to share, please leave them in the comments section down below. I hope to see you soon on Twitch. Take care.